Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. This is Joe, the bearded historian. He'll tell you an interesting story. Be careful of his soldiers, they can be brats. This is Angel, she's an entity. She'll cause chaos and plant her hands at you. This is Sue, she likes spirits, not the alcohol. She's the reason this channel exists. This is David, he likes fire trucks. He's here occasionally. Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. We preserve his story.
Welcome to Wednesday. Today's video should be an interesting one. It's all about exploring. How many explorers within a group? Raise your hand. It's about going places that nobody's been before. Or rarely goes in our case. So I figure that this is like a good example of us, maybe in the 1800s. Although I can't draw maps. I can't draw at all. So, we'd be screwed there, but that's okay. Are you ready? I've chosen a horse race because there were horses in the story. I could have chose a dog because there's a dog in the story. Anyway, I chose horses. Anyway, all right, ready? Here we go. Shout out time. Here's a shout out just for you. You support me, so I'll support you. This shout out is for our friends. Let's see who it is today. All right, there's She Stole. There's Hiking Ontario. There's Laura. There's Travis. There's Mark. There's Scully. There's Demi. There's Popcorn. There's Blended. There's Nacho Daily. There's Hillbillies. Lower. There's Peach and New and Walter and Tammy. There's Chronicles and Dave. There's Duo and Stace. Carol and Mike's Garden. Sylvia, Carnival. Tate, GOP3. There's Nacho Daily. Strong Mind. Wanda, Principal, Tammy, Patty, Steve and Tina. Oh, it's getting close. It's getting close. It's Hillbillies. Hang on a minute. And this is our winner, Back Road Hillbillies. They are at 28.5, no, 22.85K. I can read word numbers, I really can. And they like to do outdoor things with family and friends. So here they've got some magnet fishing and healing drums. Metal detecting looks like. And then there's some more outdoorsy stuff. Oh, those are cool plants. Some fish. And then, of course, they did some lives around the 4th of July, which is always fun. So check them out. They're really fun, very supportive, and very wholesome. And enjoy the bearded historian rambling about this, that, and the other thing. Bye-bye. All right, missed you, brother. Tell the history of the world. Part 1. No, just kidding.
Could be part 4 or 5 by now.
Only 4 or 5?
Only 4 or 5.
Oh.
After all, we're doing the early parts, dealing with, dirt. But
Dinosaurs.
yeah, something to give that fun effect. Now, for today's assignment, we're going to have a little fun because, people like it when I wing it, apparently.
What? No.
The first thing I want people to do is look at the United States, but think about it not in the 21st century. Think about it as it was in, say, 1803. Okay. The United States might be maybe a third of what it is now, not as populated. 90% of the country is, sucked up against the Atlantic Ocean. France just got done making a deal with, Thomas Jefferson for the Louisiana Purchase. So this great big swath in the middle of the country just got bought by the newly found United States of America.
Oh, we almost exist.
Almost. But the other things to think about at this point is that, cars still haven't been invented. Uh, if you want a modus of transportation, you horses, boats are still a primary source for people going anywhere, especially up rivers. And there's this great big swath of open land out here to the west. Some of your guides, some of your mountain men, they're out, doing trapping and looking for stuff like that. And of course, the Native American tribes are out there. Well, Thomas Jefferson, who, is actually quite a intelligent fella when it came to it, he was looking for one of the most direct, practical water communications across the continent and for purposes of commerce. And so he wanted to put a special importance on declaring the sovereignty over the land occupied by this many different Native American tribes along the Missouri River, and also getting an accurate sense of the resources. Because, let's think about it. There's all that territory, and right now, if you think of 1803, you look along the Mississippi River, and you have St. Charles, you have several key cities that are just starting to bloom. And so he, started looking at some of his research. He would read accounts about adventures of other explorers on the western frontier, consequently maintaining a long-held interest in the further exploration. Apparently, back in the 1780s, while he was the minister to France, he met a John Lydiard in Paris, where they discussed a possible trip to the Pacific Northwest. He read about Captain James Cook's voyage to the Pacific Ocean from 1784, an account of Cook's third voyage, and Lepage Duprat's The History of Louisiana from 1763, which greatly influenced his decision to send this expedition. Like Cook, he wished to discover a practical route through the Northwest to the Pacific Ocean. Back then, even at that time frame, they looked at the Southwest as being too arid, too desert-like. And so the main idea was, the Mississippi and then the Missouri rivers all flowed to the Northwest, and maybe by chance it would be a good source of transportation, depending on weather. And so they started putting the you might say the ducks in a row to get this operation going. They also read about, like Captain Cook wishing to discover the practical route, a fellow named Alexander Mackenzie had charted a route to the quest for the Pacific, following what else? Canada's Mackenzie River to the Arctic Ocean in 1789, and his party were the first non-indigenous people to cross mainland North America north of Mexico to reach the Pacific coast of British Columbia in 1793, 12 years earlier than Lewis and Clark did. Mackenzie's accounts in the voyages from Montreal in 1801 informed Jefferson of Britain's intent to establish control over the lucrative fur trade of the Columbia River, convincing him of the importance of securing this territory post-haste. On with it, boys. Well, in Philadelphia, an Israel Whalen, purveyor of public supplies, started picking up the necessary supplies for this expedition. There was a list that was provided by Meriwether Lewis, name slightly familiar. And among these items, get on to this, 193 pounds of portable soup. Bring in the Campbell's.
I didn't know we had portable soup back then.
Yeah. 130 rolls of pigtail tobacco.
Really?
30 gallons of strong spirit wine. Wide assortment of Native American presents. Medical and surgical supplies. Mosquito netting and oilskin bags. So, a real kind of mixed lot altogether. Well, 2 years into his presidency, Jefferson would ask Congress to fund an expedition through the Louisiana Territory to the Pacific Ocean. He did make an attempt to make a secret of the Lewis and Clark expedition from the Spanish, French, or British officials, but rather claimed different reasons for the venture. He used a secret message to ask for funding due to the poor relations with the opposition Federalist Party in Congress, and Congress would subsequently appropriate $2,324 for supplies and food, the appropriation of which was left in Lewis's charge. Well, in 1803, Jefferson would commission the Corps of Discovery, and again, Army Captain Meriwether Lewis, its leader, who then, in turn, invited William Clark to co-lead the expedition with him. Lewis would demonstrate remarkable skills and potential as a frontiersman, and Jefferson made efforts to prepare him for the long journey ahead as the expedition was gaining approval and funding. Jefferson would explain this choice for Lewis, saying, "It is impossible to find a character who is a complete science in botany, natural history, mineralogy, and astronomy, joined the firmness of constitution and character, prudence, habits adapted to the wood, and familiarity with the Indian manners and character, requisite for this undertaking, all the latter qualifications Captain Lewis has." Well, in 1803, Jefferson sent Lewis to Philadelphia to study medicinal cures under Benjamin Rush, a physician and former leader of the American Revolution. He also arranged for Lewis to be further educated by Andrew Ellicott, an astronomer who instructed him in the use of a sextant, among other navigational instruments. From Benjamin Smith Barton, Lewis learned how to describe and preserve plants and animal specimens. From Robert Patterson, refinements in computing latitude and longitude, and Caspar Wistar covered fossils and the search for possible living remnants. Lewis, however, was not ignorant of science, having demonstrated a marked capacity to learn, especially with Jefferson as his teacher. At Monticello, Jefferson possessed an enormous library on the subject of North American geography, to which Lewis had full access. He spent his time consulting maps and books as well as conferring with Jefferson. So, basically, he was going to set the guy up to succeed as best as he could. I would have loved to have seen his library on the maps, though.
That would have been interesting.
Yeah, because you think about all the different fur traders that occupied the western half of the present-day America. You know, and how those people survived, lived, thrived. You know, and you also got to think about that roads. There's no roads. There's trails. You know, transportation outlets. You consider it, you know, where a horse might ride a road. But again, you know, this was about 100 years, or give or take 10, before automobiles came out. You know, 90 years plus. Wagons weren't brought along. They did bring along a longboat, though, which is kind of a neat invention. And so, you know, they were setting all this gear up. A keel boat was used in that first year journey, built near Pittsburgh. And in the summer of 1803, Lewis's specifications, and it was completed in August on the 31st. The vessel immediately loaded with equipment and provisions. Lewis also bought himself a dog called Seaman to accompany him.
Here, Seaman. Come here, Seaman.
Yeah. We're going to have a lot of jokes on that one, class. They're amicable, large working dogs and good swimmers, lovers of water, and commonly found on fishing boats, and they can assist in water rescues. This dog would prove to be a valuable member of the party, along with hunting and protection from bears and other potential predators. He was the only animal to complete the entire trip.
Wow, that's kind of impressive.
Yeah. Well, Lewis and his crew would set sail that afternoon, traveling down the Ohio River to meet up with Clark near Louisville, Kentucky, on October 1803, and at the Falls of the Ohio. Their goal was to explore the vast territory acquired by Louisiana Purchase and to establish trade and, again, U.S. sovereignty over the Native Americans along the Missouri River. Jefferson also wanted to establish a U.S. claim of discovery to the Pacific Northwest and Oregon Territory by documenting an American presence there before the European nations would claim the land.
What? No.
Yeah. Heaven forbid, let's play tug of war over a bunch of land.
They wouldn't want any interest in that.
No. And according to some historians, Jefferson understood that he would have a better claim of ownership to the Pacific Northwest if the team gathered scientific data on animals and plants. However, its main objectives were centered around finding an all-water route to the Pacific coast and commerce. His instructions to the expedition stated, "The object of your mission is to explore the Missouri River and such principal stream of it as by its course in communication with the waters of the Pacific Ocean, whether the Columbia, Oregon, Colorado, or any other river, may offer the most direct and practical water communication across this continent for the purpose of commerce." Now, the U.S. Mint also did their part, and they prepared special silver medals with a portrait of Jefferson and inscribed them with the message of friendship and peace called the Indian Peace Medals.
Yeah.
The soldiers were to distribute them to the tribes that they met. The expedition also prepared advanced weapons to display military firepower. By all means, let's show them how our boomsticks work.
Boomsticks.
Among these was an Austrian-made .46 caliber Grandioli air rifle, a repeating rifle with a 20-round tubular magazine that was powerful enough to kill a deer. The expedition was prepared with flint-arc firearms, knives, blacksmithing supplies, and cartography equipment. They also carried flags, gift bundles, medicine, and other items that they would need for the journey. Well, the route of Lewis and Clark's expedition took them to the Missouri River, to its headwaters, up to the Pacific Ocean via the Columbia River, and it may have been influenced by the purported transcontinental journey of Montecache Ape of the same route of a century before. Now, interestingly enough, Jefferson had a copy of LePage's book in his library detailing this itinerary, and Lewis carried a copy with him during the expedition. However, LePage's description of the route across the continent neglected to mention the need to cross the Rocky Mountains.
That's the one thing about those old maps
Uh-huh.
is they were probably not very accurate because there were no like landmarks.
Yeah.
So you could say I went 10 kilometers west, and if you drift because you're not walking straight or you get distracted, you're not going the same path even though you're kind of like parallel to that path.
Yeah. And the primary, purpose that they were using also is Missouri River. There's not a lot of other directions you can go.
Yeah, but the Missouri River is also huge.
Right.
You may be, up or down from where they were.
Sure. Now, it might be the source of Lewis and Clark's mistaken belief that they could easily carry boats from the Missouri's headwaters to the westward flowing Columbia. Yeah, hiking overland with a boat might be a little difficult.
Yeah.
Well, the Corps of Discovery would depart from Camp Dubois, or Camp Wood, at 4 p.m. on May 14th, 1804. Under Clark's command, they traveled up the Missouri River in their keel boat and 2 pirogues to St. Charles, Missouri, where Lewis would join them 6 days later. The expedition would set out the next afternoon on May the 21st. Now, while accounts vary, it is believed that the Corps had as many as 45 members, including officers, enlisted military personnel, civilian volunteers, and York, an African-American man enslaved by Clark. Well, from St. Charles, the expedition followed the Missouri through what is now Kansas City, Missouri, and Omaha, Nebraska, and on August the 20th, 1804, Sergeant Charles Floyd died, apparently, from appendicitis.
Whoops.
He had been the first to sign up with the Corps and was the only member to die during the expedition.
I mean, that's pretty good.
Yeah. He was buried at a bluff by the river now named after him in what is now Sioux City, Iowa. We drove by there.
We've been up butter.
Now, his burial site was marked with a cedar post which was inscribed with the name and day of his death 1 mile up the river. The expedition camped at a small river which they named Floyd's River. During the final week of August, Lewis and Clark reached the edge of the Great Plains, a place abounding with elk, deer, bison, pronghorn, and beavers. Now, the Lewis and Clark expedition established relations with about 24 different Native American nations, without whose help would have been risking starvation during the harsh winters or become hopelessly lost in the vast ranges of the Rocky Mountains. Now, the Americans in the Lakota Nation, whom the Americans called Sioux or Tituan Sioux, had problems when they met, and there was concern that the two sides might clash.
Nah. Never clash.
According to Harry W. Fritz, and earlier Missouri River travelers had warned of this powerful and aggressive tribe, determined to block free trade on the river. The Sioux were also expecting a retaliatory raid from the Omaha tribe to the south. A recent Sioux raid had killed 75 Omaha men, burned 40 lodges, and taken 4 dozen prisoners.
Well, how nice of them.
Yeah, so charming.
So nice. They're so nice.
They'll get on so well.
They're so nice.
Yeah. The expedition held talks with the Lakota near the confluence of the Missouri and the Bad Rivers in what is now Fort Pierre, South Dakota. Now, one of their horses disappeared, and they believed the Sioux were responsible. Afterwards, the two sides met, and there was a disagreement, and the Sioux asked the men to stay or to give more gifts, or tribute instead, before being allowed to pass through their territory. Clark wrote that they were warlike and they were the vilest miscreants of the savage race.
Ooh, miscreants! Yeah. How dare they?
How dare you use a word with that many letters? They came close to blows several times until a Lakota chief, Black Buffalo, persuaded Lewis to distribute more tobacco to the assembled warriors. Lewis complied, and the expedition was allowed to continue upstream to the Arikara villages. Now, in the winter of 1804-1805, the partly built Fort Mandan near present-day Washburn, North Dakota, they stayed there until April 7th, 1805. The expedition sent the keel boat back to St. Louis with a sample of specimens, some never before seen, east of the Mississippi. One chief asked Lewis and Clark to provide a boat for passage through their national territory. The Americans quickly continued westward, upriver, and camped for the winter in the Mandan Nation's territory. Well, after the expedition set up camps, nearby tribal members came to visit in fair numbers, some staying all night. For several days, the Lewis and Clark met in council with the Mandan chiefs. Here they met a French-Canadian fur trapper named Toussaint Charnabo and his young Shoshone wife, Sacagawea. Charnabo at the time began to serve as the expedition's translator. Peace was established between the expedition and the Mandan chiefs with the sharing of a Mandan ceremonial pipe. By April 25th, Captain Lewis wrote in his progress report of the expedition's activities and observations of the Native American nations he had encountered to date in a book called A Statistical View of the Indian Nations Inhabiting the Territory of Louisiana. That's one heck of a title.
Right?
That goes all the way around the book. Which outlined the names of the various tribes, their locations, trading practices, and water routes used, among other points. President Jefferson would later present this report to Congress.
Woo!
Well, they followed the Missouri to its headwaters and over the Continental Divide at Lemhi Pass. Then
Let
north,
me pass.
Let me pass. Pass it over. Then north to Traveler's Rest and crossed the Bitterroots at Lolo Pass. There they descended on foot, then proceeded in canoes down to the Clearwater, Snake, and Columbia Rivers, past Celio Falls and present-day Portland, at the confluence of the Willamette and Columbia Rivers. Lewis and Clark used William Robert Burroughs' 1792 notes and maps to orient themselves once they had reached the lower Columbia River. The sighting of Mount Hood and other stratovolcanoes confirmed the expedition had almost reached the Pacific Ocean.
I think.
The expedition actually did sight the Pacific Ocean for the first time on November 7th, 1805, arriving 2 weeks later. The expedition faced the beginning of its second bitter winter, camped on the north side of the Columbia River in a storm-racked area Clark called Dismal Ditch. What a dismal place. Lack of food was a major factor. The elk, party's main source of food, had retreated from their usual haunts into the mountains, and the party now was too poor to purchase enough food from the neighboring tribes. On November the 24th, 1805, the majority of the party voted to move the camp to the south side of the Columbia River, near modern Astoria, Oregon. Both Sacagawea and the enslaved York participated in the vote. Now, On the south side of the Columbia River, 2 miles upstream, on the west side of the Neto River, now Lewis and Clark River, they constructed Fort Clatsop. They did this not just for shelter and protection, but also to officially establish the American presence there with the American flag flying over the fort. During the winter at Fort Clatsop, Lewis committed himself to writing. He filled many pages of his journals with valuable knowledge, mostly about botany, because of the abundant growth in forests that covered that part of the continent. The health of the men also became a problem, with many suffered from colds and influenza. Now, knowing that maritime fur traders sometimes visited the lower Columbia River, Lewis and Clark repeatedly asked the local Chinooks about trading ships. They learned that Captain Samuel Hill had been there in early 1805. This communication caused Clark to record the name as Halley. Captain Hill returned in November 1805 and anchored about 10 miles away from the fort. The Chinook told Hill about Lewis and Clark, but no direct contact was made. Interestingly enough, a Russian maritime expedition also arrived under statesman Nikolai Reznov, arrived at the mouth of the Columbia River while Lewis and Clark were still there. Neither Reznov or Lewis and Clark knew about each other. Reznov, who came from Novo-Archangelisk, today Sitka, Alaska, intending to establish a Russian agricultural colony to help with the perennial food shortages in Russian America, and made plans for a relocation of the capital of Russian America from Sitka to the lower Columbia River. But his ship, Juno, was unable to cross the Columbia Bar. So Reznov went to California instead, setting in motion a process that eventually led to the founding of Fort Ross, California. Well, Lewis was determined to remain at the fort until April 1st, but was still anxious to move out at the earliest opportunity. By March 22nd, the stormy weather had subsided, and the following morning, on the 23rd, 1806, the journey home began. The Corps began their journey homeward using canoes to ascend the Columbia River, and later by trekking overland. Before leaving, Clark gave the Chinook a letter to give to the next ship captain to visit, which was the same Captain Hill who had been nearby during the winter. Hill took the letter to Canton and had it forwarded to Thomas Jefferson, who thus received it before Lewis and Clark returned.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah.
Pass a letter.
They made their way to Camp Chapanoosh in Idaho along the north bank of the Clearwater River, where members of the expedition collected 65 horses in preparation of crossing the Bitterroot Mountains, lying between modern-day Idaho and western Montana. However, the range was still covered in snow, which prevented the expedition from making the crossing. On April the 11th, while the Corps waited for the snow to diminish, Lewis's dog was stolen by Native Americans. No! But was retrieved shortly.
That's good.
Worried that
Save the dog!
Save the dog. Worried that other such acts might follow, Lewis warned the chief that any other wrongdoing or mischievous acts would result in instant death.
No more mischief.
Don't steal our dog. This is the original John Wick moment right here.
Right?
On July 3rd, before crossing the Continental Divide, the Corps split into two teams so Lewis could explore the Moraes River. Lewis's group of 4 men sent some men from the Blackfeet Nation. During the night, the Blackfeet tried to steal their weapons. In the struggle, the soldiers would kill 2 Blackfeet men. Lewis, George Doriol, and the Field brothers fled over 100 miles in a day before they camped again. Meanwhile, Clark had entered the Crow tribe's territory. In the night, half of the Clark's horses disappeared, but not a single crow had been seen.
Hey, wait a minute. When did we split up?
Back up on July the 3rd.
I missed that part. Okay, continue.
Yep. Now, again, the Crow apparently were really good at stealing horses. Lewis and Clark stayed separated until they reached the confluence of the Yellowstone and Missouri rivers on August 11th. As the groups reunited, one of Clark's hunters, Prez Cruzet, mistook Lewis for an elk and fired, injuring Lewis in the thigh. Once together, the Corps were able to return home quickly via the Missouri River. They would reach St. Louis on the 23rd of September, 1806. Now, on March In March 1804, before the expedition began in May, the Spaniards in New Mexico learned from General James Wilkinson that the Americans were encroaching on territory claimed by Spain. After the Lewis and Clark expedition set off in May, the Spanish sent 4 armed expeditions of 52 soldiers, mercenaries, and Native Americans on August 1st, 1804 from Santa Fe, New Mexico, northward under Pedro Vial and Jose Jarba to intercept Lewis and Clark and imprison the entire expedition.
Well, they did a good job, didn't they?
Yeah. They reached the Pawnee settlement on the Platte River in central Nebraska and learned the expedition had been there many days before. You missed us.
You missed.
Zeal's attempt to intercept them was unsuccessful.
Really? I had not noticed.
Yeah. Now, the Lewis and Clark expedition gained an understanding of the geography of the Northwest and they produced the first accurate maps of the area. During the journey, Lewis and Clark drew about 140 maps. Stephen Ambrose said the expedition filled in the main outlines of the area. The expedition documented natural resources and plants that had previously unknown to European Americans, though not to the indigenous peoples. Again, they lived out there. Hello.
Right? We're new.
Yeah. Lewis and Clark were the first Americans to cross the Continental Divide and the first Americans to see Yellowstone, enter into Montana, and produce an official description of these different regions. Their visit to the Pacific Northwest, maps and proclamations of sovereignty with medals and flags were legal steps needed to claim title to each indigenous nation's land under the Discovery Doctrine. We all love that doctrine.
We discovered it, therefore it did not exist beforehand, and is now our land.
Of course, it's also the grand question I've always had. Don't you think the Native Americans should have, talked to the French and say, hey, wait a second, you can't sell us, we're here.
Nah.
Well, the expedition was sponsored by the American Philosophical Society, APS. Lewis and Clark received some instruction, again in astronomy, botany, climatology, ethnology, geography, meteorology, mineralogy, ornithology, and zoology.
Ologies.
Ologies. And during this expedition, they made contact with over 70 different Native American tribes and described more than 200 new plant and animal species. Now, Jefferson had seen their expedition declare sovereignty and demonstrate their military strength to ensure Native tribes would be subordinate to the U.S. Didn't work quite that well.
They tried hard.
And European colonizers did elsewhere. After the expedition, the maps were produced, allowed the further discovery and settlement of this vast territory in the years that would follow. In 1807, Patrick Gass, what a name, private in the U.S. Army, published an account of the journey. He was promoted to sergeant during the course of the expedition. Paul Allen edited a 2-volume history of the Lewis and Clark expedition that was published in 1814 in Philadelphia, but without mention of the actual author, banker Nicholas Biddle. Even then, the complete report was not made public until much more recently. The earliest authorized version of the Lewis and Clark journals resides in the Maureen and Mike Mansfield Library at the University of Montana. It's up by us.
Ooh.
Now, again, one of the expedition's primary objectives was, as directed by Jefferson, was to be a surveillance mission and report back the whereabouts, military strength, lives, activities, and cultures of the various Native American tribes that inhabited the territory newly acquired by the United States as part of the Louisiana Purchase and the Northwest in general. The expedition was to make Native people understand that their lands now belonged to the United States and their great father in Washington was now their sovereign. I'm not sure how walking through the neighborhood is going to really install that belief.
I don't know about you, but I think I can walk through the neighborhood and claim everything.
Let's go try that. I just don't see that working very well.
I'm going to walk through Walmart and claim everything.
Well, especially when they had that earlier stick issue where the horse disappeared.
Well, that was a small misunderstanding.
I could just see all of a sudden Lewis and Clark got thrown into the Missouri River and drowned.
Whoops, it's just a small misunderstanding.
Minor.
Don't worry about it.
And the fact that some of these tribes also helped them survive, heaven forbid.
Which, I mean, is good.
Yeah.
Help thy neighbor.
Yep.
Unless you're killing them.
The expedition had blank leather-bound journals and ink for the purpose of recording such encounters, as well as scientific and geological information. They are provided with various gifts of medals, ribbons, needles, mirrors, and other articles, which are intended to ease any tensions when negotiating their passage with various Native American chiefs whom they had encountered along the way. Now, many of the tribes had friendly experiences with the British and French fur traders in various isolated encounters along the Missouri and Columbia rivers, and for the most part, the expedition did not encounter hostilities. Again, the Teton Sioux tribe in September 25th, 1804, one of the three tribes that comprised the Great Sioux Nation, under chiefs that included Black Buffalo and the Partisan. The chiefs confronted the expedition and demanded tribute from the expedition for their passage over the river. The 7 native tribes that comprised the Lakota people controlled a vast inland empire and expected gifts from strangers who wished to navigate the rivers or to pass through the land.
Interestingly enough, them and the Arikara did not get along. And later on, there was issues of the Arikara were actually blocking the Sioux from crossing the river. But earlier issues.
According to Harry W. Fritz, all early Missouri River travelers had warned of this powerful and aggressive tribe determined to block free trade on the river. Again, they were also talking about the Sioux had expected a retaliatory raid from the Omaha tribe. To the south, and a recent Sioux raid had killed 75 Omaha men, so I can kind of understand why there's some bad blood there.
No bad blood.
Says Captain Lewis made the first mistake by offering the Sioux chief gifts first, which insulted and angered the partisan chief. Communication was difficult since the expedition's only Sioux language interpreter was Pierre Dorion, who had stayed behind with the other party and was also involved in diplomatic affairs with another tribe. Consequently, both chiefs were offered a few gifts, but neither were satisfied, and they wanted some gifts for their warriors and tribe. At that point, some of the warriors from the partisan tribe took hold of their boat and one of the oars. Lewis took a firm stand, ordering a display of force and presenting arms. Captain Clark brandished his sword and threatened a violent reprisal. Just before the situation erupted into violent confrontation, Black Buffalo ordered his warriors to back off. Now, the captains were able to negotiate their passage without further incident with the aid of better gifts and a bottle of whiskey. During the next 2 days, the expedition made camp not far from Black Buffalo's tribe. Similar incidents occurred when they tried to leave, but trouble was averted with gifts of tobacco. Now, as the expeditions encountered the various Native American tribes during the course of their journey, they observed and recorded information regarding their lifestyles, customs, and social codes as they lived by, as directed by Jefferson. By European standards, the Native American way of life seemed harsh and unforgiving, as witnessed by members of the expedition. After many encounters and camping in close proximity to the Native American nations for extended periods of time during the winter months, they soon learned firsthand of their customs and social norms. One of the primary customs that distinguished Native American cultures from those of the West was that it was customary for men to take on 2 or more wives if they're able to provide for them, and often took on a wife or wives who were members of the immediate family circle. Men in the Minnetaree and Mandan tribes would often take on a sister for a wife. Chastity among women was not held in high regard. Infant daughters, who were often sold by the father to men who were grown, usually for horses or mules. Women in Sioux nations were often bartered away for horses or other supplies, yet this was not practiced among the Shoshone nation, who held their women in higher regard. That's kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm.
They also witnessed that many of the Native American nations were constantly at war with other tribes, especially the Sioux, who, while remaining generally friendly to white fur traders, had proudly boasted of and justified almost complete destruction of the once great Cahokia nation, along with the Missouris, Illinois, Casias, and Piramis tribes that lived about the countryside adjacent to the upper Mississippi and Missouri rivers.
Now, the one lady that was critical to this whole thing,
Sacagawea. Again, Shoshone Native American who arrived with her husband and owner, Toussaint Charbonneau, on the expedition to the Pacific Ocean. On February 11th, 1805, a few weeks after her first contact with the expedition, Sacagawea went into labor, which was slow and painful, so the Frenchman Charbonneau suggested she be given a potion of rattlesnake's rattle to aid in the delivery. Lewis happened to have some snake's rattle with him. A short time after administering the potion, she delivered a healthy boy who was given the name Jean Baptiste Charbonneau. While the expedition reached Maria's River on June 16, 1805, Sacagawea became dangerously ill. She was able to find some relief by drinking mineral water from the sulphur spring that fed into the river. Though she has been discussed in literature frequently, much of the information is exaggeration or fiction. Scholars say she did notice some geographical features, but Sacagawea was not the guide for the expedition. She was important to them as an interpreter in other ways. The sight of a woman and her infant son would have been reassuring to some indigenous nations, and she played an important role in the diplomatic relations by talking to chiefs, easing tensions, and giving the impressions of a peaceful mission. In his writings, Meriwether Lewis presented a somewhat negative view of her, though Clark had a higher regard for her and provided some support for her children in subsequent years to the journals. They would use harsher terms with her, but also would refer to Sacagawea and other indigenous peoples. Primarily, the accomplishments, as I mentioned, they met their objectives, reaching the Pacific, mapping and establishing the presence for a legal claim to land.
They had really weird legal claims back then.
Yeah.
I'm just going to walk down the street and say, this is mine, this is mine, this is mine. I don't think it'll go very well, though.
To be fair, I don't know how else they would be able to claim it.
Yeah.
Especially areas that were empty.
Yeah.
Areas that had Native Americans or indigenous people or whatever you want to call them. The problem with that is that they tended to move. They may be there in January, but you come back in the middle of summer, they may be somewhere else.
Yeah. Because you think about the Great Plains, it was, I mean, even today, you think about the area from western Montana to the Missouri River, down to Nebraska, and up into North Dakota. That is such a wide open area. You could hide 1 million people and nobody would find it.
Right, as long as you, spread them out.
Yeah, you make them disappear into the Black Hills. Hello.
But, they gained information on the natural habitat, flora and fauna, bringing back various plants, seeds, and mineral specimens. They mapped the topography of the land and designated the location of mountain ranges, rivers, and many Native American tribes during the course of their journey. They also learned and recorded much about the language and customs of the Native American tribes they encountered, and brought back many artifacts, including bows, clothing, and ceremonial robes. Now, as they also mentioned, 2 months would pass after the expedition's end before Jefferson made his first public statement to Congress and others, giving a 1-sentence summary about the successes of the expedition before getting into the justification for the expenses involved. In the course of their journey, they acquired a knowledge of numerous tribes before unknown. They informed themselves of the trade which may be carried on with them, the best channels and positions for it, and they are enabled to give with accuracy the geography of the line they pursued. Back east, the botanical and zoological discoveries drew intense interest of the American Philosophical Society, who requested specimens. Various artifacts traded with the Native Americans, and reports of plants and wildlife, along with various seeds obtained. Jefferson used seeds from the Missouri hominy corn, along with the number of other identified seeds, to plant at Monticello, which he cultivated and studied. He later reported on an Indian corn he had grown being an excellent food source. The expedition helped establish the U.S. presence in newly acquired territory, and beyond, it opened the door to further exploration, trade, and scientific discoveries.
The one thing I did find funny, though, is when you look at the map of exactly where they went, and
I don't know if you just call it extreme lucky or, when they took and came out in that direction, they would straight past Yellowstone, modern day Yellowstone National Park. Can you imagine what they would have freaked out at seeing a geyser go off? What the heck was that? Underground dragon? No. And, they talk about places along there where the ground is not stable. Imagine all of a sudden a horse and a rider falling through the ground. That would probably, spook the heck. And this is all territory that, except for a few side stories and, like they were saying, there was a couple books that went with them and information that they had gained from trappers and traders. This was all wide open area. I mean, it's like having the ultimate park out there.
Go where no man has gone before.
Yeah, I mean, a few of the tribes, and again, the nomadic ones are out there. You might run into them in April of this year. Next time you might see them might be in August, same year. So it depends on, if they're following where the bison have traveled through. Again, Great Plains, great big place. A lot of wide open area. And of course, you also might accidentally wander into a battle between two tribes. And you can really have a mess. But somehow, with all these odds against them, Lewis and Clark pulled off their great discovery.
Still think it's cool that they only lost like one person.
Yeah, all the way at the beginning, too.
And it wasn't even for like anything travel related. It was appendix.
Appendicitis, yeah. That was just crazy. But this has been the fun week of the Bearded Historian. We will see
did
you
a
guys
whole
next
week?
One day.
Whoa.
And then next week we'll give them another topic.
We will?
Well, maybe. No, so I'm going to take a week off.
That would be hilariously funny.
Yeah. Oh, just for a heads up for the people who are keeping notes, the first week in June, I will be having cataract surgery. I do plan on still having my my piece done, so have to tune in and see how that turns out. So, but this has been the Bearded Historian for the Bud Files. We'll see you guys next week. Bye bye.
Blah 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 blah.
Blah 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 blah.